Here we're about to enter a residential building from the Byzantine period. It's under the Umayyad Palace, and there's quite a bit of excavation. This is a wet room in the Byzantine House. And here you see a model of the house. This reads, "The building with its many rooms was built in the 6th century. Builders used remains of earlier structures and ancient cisterns to complete the construction of the house." Here we have preserved wood under bricks, and it's incredible that this wood has been preserved. Here's another room in the house with a mosaic on the floor. And this house, as I said, just keeps going on and on. Now we're about to enter the Western Wall Tunnel, also known as the Rabbi's Tunnel, and this is a presentation by our tour guide about the construction of Herod's Temple near the time of Jesus.
The northern end of the hilltop over here, and he constructs in its place the Temple Mount, which you can see how unbelievable and large it is. This actually is the size, the area up here would fit about 18 soccer fields, just to give you an idea of how large it is. Now when we stood outside at the Western Wall, we were standing at a little portion of this western retaining wall of the Temple Mount. We weren't actually standing at a portion of the western wall of the temple, and that's because the Second Temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago by the Romans in 70 CE. The Romans came here, conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the Second Temple. Now, when the Muslims conquered Jerusalem about 600 years after the Romans, about 1,300 years ago, the Muslims construct what remains to this day on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, in the same spot as the First Temple and the Second Temple stood. The Dome of the Rock today stands on the Temple Mount. I'm sure you noticed it as you came into the Old City. You can't miss it. About 600-700 years ago, the Mamelukes come to Jerusalem. They want to build their homes as close as possible to the temple, to the Dome of the Rock. This for them is a holy spot. However, on either side of the Temple Mount, which still stands, there are valleys. On the eastern side, you have the Kidron Valley, and cutting down here through the western side, you have the Tyropian Valley. So what they do is they construct a system of arches right here up along the western wall, and they build their neighborhood, their homes right here abutting the western wall of the Temple Mount. In fact, one of those arches stands above us in this room here. And here you get a sense of how they built their homes right up as close as possible to the level of and to the wall, western wall of the Temple Mount. Now today, if you walk through the Muslim quarter here in the Old City, this is where you're walking. These are, today you have Muslim homes that reside on those very system of vaults and arches which were constructed about 700 years ago. Now here you also get a sense of proportion. You can see the Western Wall Plaza, the amount of the Western Wall that's exposed to us outside. It's just this little portion here in the scheme relative to the entire length of the Western Wall. Now when we go through the tunnels today, what we mean by the Western Wall tunnels is that we'll be walking along the length of the Western Wall underneath the tunnels created by those vaults that were built by the Mamelukes. Okay, so that's what we mean by the Western Wall tunnels. What the archaeologists have excavated out under the arches like the one you see above us. So we've just walked inside this area. We're going to walk in a little bit further, and then we're going to walk towards and approach the Western Wall. And then for the tour today, we'll be walking along to the northern end of the Western Wall until we reach an ancient aqueduct. We'll enter that aqueduct, walking away from the wall, and we'll emerge by a Herodian pool.
This is what the Temple Mount would have looked like at the time of Jesus. This area was constructed by Herod. He can significantly increase the size of the Temple Mount and the size of the temple. You see in the center the actual temple and the Holy of Holies. Only priests were allowed in this area at certain times of the year. Surrounding that is the court of the priests and Levites. Only priests and Levites allowed in there, and then the court of women around that, and then the whole larger court is the court of the Gentiles. Off to the right you see Solomon's portico with the pillars. So this is an excellent model of the temple. This is the largest stone along the western wall. It just keeps going on and on and on. Nobody really has any idea how they got it here, because it weighs something like 570 tons. So it's massive. This is where it ends right here. You're about to see the closest place to the actual site of the Holy of Holies, and I only get a quick glimpse of it because several women were praying there, but this is it right here. So this sign reads Herodian masonry. The masonry on the right is from the Herodian period, contrasting with the previously repaired section, which is probably Muslim from the 8th century. Stones are dressed carefully, blocks fitting perfectly together. So if you look here, we talked about this earlier about the outlined stones. This is certainly a Herodian section of the wall that we're walking along in the Western Wall Tunnel, also known as the Rabbi's Tunnel. And that is Dr. Palm right in front of me. You can kind of see here they've excavated down to the bottom of the Western Wall. We're not actually walking along what was the bottom of the wall.
We're actually standing on a small patch of street from 2,000 years ago. But imagine to yourself that this street is actually much wider, and these columns are also from that original street. Perhaps they were part of a colonnade here or a small piazza. But this, try to envision, this was the main bustling street of ancient Jerusalem, running north to south along the Western Wall. If you visit the Machane Yehuda Shuk marketplace in Jerusalem, so you saw how crazy that is, how loud, all the different smells and sounds, and people bartering and just full of activity. That's what this street was like. People came here, people were selling animals that other people were purchasing to bring as sacrifices. People were bringing their wares, their merchandise from all over the world, different currencies. It's all alive and exciting right here. And if you can think for a moment of who might have actually stood on these exact stones where you're standing, it's quite moving to think about it. Perhaps Herod stood here when he came to appraise the construction. Perhaps the high priest walked here on his way to perform the rituals in the temple. Perhaps Rabbi Akiva, one of the ancient Jewish sages, walked here debating some issue with his colleagues. Perhaps Jesus walked on these very stones. We really don't know. What we do know is that this was a main street, so probably some of those people at some point crossed this exact patch of street. Now, the American astronaut Neil Armstrong actually visited here, and when he left this area of walking on the Herodian street, he said he was overcome with emotion. He said, "I feel more moved and more emotional walking on these stones than I did walking on the moon." Topographical model of the entrance to the tunnels, remember that northern chunk of bedrock that had to be carved out? We've now reached it. We're at the northern end of the Western Wall. And it's as if the workers took a lunch break and never came back. And that actually may be the case. We don't know for sure. Perhaps King Herod died, and that put an end to the construction. Perhaps they ran out of funds, which halted the finance for the project. Or perhaps the Romans were approaching and they simply dropped their tools and this spot and fled for their lives.
So now we're actually leaving the Western Wall. We're going west away from the wall into an ancient aqueduct, which was the most impressive water system during the time of Jesus.
There's a first century fan. So this aqueduct leads out into a cistern. And you see there's...
So now we're at the larger part of this pool, and it's dark in here, but you can see the light that just reflected off of the water. This is known as the Struvian pool. Struvian is Greek for lark, and a lark is a small bird. This was known to be the smallest of the pools in first century Jerusalem. It was actually about 8 times as big as this, so it's pretty large. And this is under the Antonia Fortress, which is at the northern end of the Temple Mount to protect the Temple Mount. So we're at Via Dolorosa, which is traditionally remembered as the Way of Suffering, where Jesus was led to Calvary to be crucified. And we're in the Muslim quarter of the city. We've just come out of the Western Wall Tunnel. Now we're at the Damascus Gate, which is the major gate to the north of the old city of Jerusalem. We're in the Muslim quarter of the city, and it's called the Damascus Gate because Damascus is the major city to the north of Jerusalem. This is a sign at the Via Dolorosa. It reads, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me," Matthew 16:24. Jesus is looking for someone who will humble himself as he did and lovingly bear his cross. Will you be this disciple?